I'd like to tell you that my latest epic experiment started because I wanted to tackle a big problem, namely the global mental health crisis. After all, the leading medical science journal, The Lancet, has declared that every country in the world is facing and failing to tackle a host of mental health problems. But although that would have been a worthy motivation for any unshrinking journalist like myself, the inspiration for my latest deep dive was also very personal. For me, like so many others, the wounds of mental illness run deep. Throughout my childhood, I witnessed the devastating effects of severe depression and addiction firsthand. When I was 24 years old, I was diagnosed with an incurable autoimmune disease which causes chronic pain and arthritis throughout my body and has a terrible tendency to flare up during times of stress. But it was perhaps my insomnia that was most troubling of all. 1 or 2 nights a week, ever since I was a teenager, like many of you here today, I would lie awake in bed, and I wonder if any of you can relate to the feeling of obsessing about an upcoming event or exam, or with thoughts churning about somebody you care about and unable to sleep. Fast forward into my adulthood, and I still hadn't learned to tame my monkey mind. And it wasn't just my future that I was thinking about. I wanted to be able to teach my kids how they could protect and nurture and nourish their mind. Now, although lifestyle choices such as eating a healthy diet or exercising regularly are all recommended for good mental well-being, I was really surprised that when I searched and searched for the mental equivalent of a 30-minute workout, or the mind's equivalent of eating 5 fresh fruit and vegetables a day, when I searched, there was nothing. I knew that any realistic solution needed to meet some key criteria. It needed to be free, or at least affordable. It needed to be available to anyone, anywhere, regardless of their education or life circumstances. It needed to flexibly fit into different schedules. And it needed to be based on scientific evidence, which was a lot to ask for in my search for a mental health eating plan. But there was one thing that fit the bill: mindfulness meditation. A meta-analysis, which means a study of all the available studies, had just concluded that a particular 8-week mindfulness program was equal to medication for preventing recurrent depression. Here's why that matters to the young people here today. We know that mental illnesses like depression have a tendency to begin sometime in our mid to late teens. And Professor Willem Kuyken, who's from Oxford University and the lead author of that meta-analysis, explained to me that there's a 50% chance that if you've had depression once, you will get it again. And an 80% chance that if you've had depression twice, you'll get it a third time. So the idea, it seemed completely absurd to me that in our current healthcare system, we wait until we're at the equivalent of stage 4 cancer before we think to intervene with our mental health. And the idea that something like mindfulness training could prevent us from developing an illness like depression in the first place is really significant. Game-changing, actually. On top of that, there were also clinical trials demonstrating that mindfulness training could help people with chronic pain, stress, anxiety, and even some addiction. So given this mental health crisis, I wondered if mindfulness could really be the solution. Should we all be practicing mindfulness in the same way we should exercise regularly and eat our vegetables? Or was this evidence too good to be true? More importantly, what would happen to my health and well-being if I committed to meditating every day for a year? Asking those questions is what led to my absurdly elaborate, harebrained, and world-first experiment, which became known as my year of living mindfully. But there was a really big problem. I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing. With 100,000 products capitalising on the word mindfulness for sale on Amazon, including my personal favourite, the Mindful Pets tear stain remover combs for dogs, it was very difficult to know who to trust and where to turn. On top of that, there was also evidence demonstrating that mindfulness training doesn't actually always work, that it can be dangerous, and that some of the science was being overhyped and oversold in the popular media. I wondered if the first person who developed mindfulness training, a man named Siddhartha Gautama, aka the Buddha, if he were around today, whether he would recognise his systematic method for relieving mental suffering in a jar of mindful mayonnaise. I knew I needed expert guidance. So I set up interviews with 18 of the world's leading mindfulness scientists, and I recruited a team of 6 Australian scientists who would track me throughout the year. And with their help, I would find out once and for all if daily meditation was worth putting on my to-do list. Now, I don't want to give away the ending for those of you who haven't yet seen my resulting film or read the book, but I will tell you this. At the beginning of the experiment, my subjective well-being score was just below average. By the end, I was well above average. I suspect that had a lot to do with working up the courage to attend a 10-day silent meditation retreat. We're talking no Netflix, no phone, no email, no social media, no talking, just me and my mind. And it turned out to be one of the most profound experiences of my life. All of that fretting about my past and worrying about my future, all those telling of stories to myself 100,000 million times a day, all that made way for moments of deep absorption, a sense of inner peace, and a feeling of connectedness to the world around me. It was as though I had learned to take a holiday from myself, and it was life-changing. Neuroscientists told me that this might partly be explained because of something called my default mode network. This is a network in the brain that was actually discovered by accident when the scientists were asking their subjects to not do anything in particular, and they noticed the same areas in the brain were lighting up in everyone. What we now know is that the default mode network is programmed to automatically take over when there's nothing more important happening. It functions to help me make sense of everything related to me, myself, and I. And although it can be super handy to know exactly who I am when I wake up in the mornings, there can be a huge downside to having a default mode network. Mother Nature didn't intend for me to be happy all the time. She wanted me to force me to mull over my life to ensure that I get along better with other people for the good of the tribe and the survival of the species. So whenever I catapult myself into horrible hypothetical futures, whenever I rewrite my verbal blunders or obsess over what to wear for my upcoming TED Talk, that is all my default mode network kicking in. And we now know that having an overactive default mode network is linked to excessive worry, rumination, self-criticism, and loneliness. And those things are also linked to a whole range of mental health disorders. And so enters mindfulness. One theory is that mindfulness training is a little bit like doing mental push-ups. So the instruction involves focusing on an object, such as the feeling of your breath or the sounds in the room around you, noticing when you're distracted or when your default mode network has come online, and then returning back to observing that object. So as to how these mental push-ups affected my life, by learning to strengthen my ability to intentionally switch away from my overactive inner me network, I experienced a greater sense of well-being and a feeling of greater connectedness. And that's why this story doesn't end with me. Because at the end of the day, I am a white woman and I live in a peaceful country, and I have been blessed with an excellent education like so many of you guys here today. And the fundamental questions still remained. Could mindfulness training really be part of the solution for the global mental health epidemic? And could it really make a difference for anyone, anywhere, in any life circumstances? And that's how I found myself travelling to the front line of the global humanitarian crisis, where more people have now been displaced by war and famine than since World War II. When you consider the scale of a refugee camp like this one that I visited on the border of Syria and Jordan, one-on-one therapy just isn't a viable solution when we're facing mental suffering on a mass scale. But I did find hope because I also travelled to Israel, where I met a team of psychologists led by Professor Amit Bernstein from the University of Haifa, who have developed something called the Moments of Refuge Project. They've been teaching a particular kind of mindfulness training to groups of East African asylum seekers who have experienced more pain and torment than any of us can even imagine. In their tens of thousands, they fled a brutal dictatorship and a civil war, only to fall into the hands of criminal Bedouin gangs who turned torture into a profitable extortion industry. And although the data shows that these people are among the most traumatised people on the planet, the 9-week mindfulness intervention is being proven in clinical trials to not only be safe, but to also be transformative. As one former child soldier named Dawit said to me, if somebody offered him either 10,000 Israeli shekels to make his problems go away or the mindfulness training, he would take the mindfulness because it's the only time someone has ever taught him how he can heal himself. So as I boarded the plane bound for my own peaceful country, my husband and kids, there was an old expression turning over in my mind. Give a man a fish and he will be hungry tomorrow. Teach a man to fish and he will be fed for a lifetime. So I know many of you young people feel that you are facing a very uncertain future, and there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. You are about to come of age in the wake of a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. And by the time you're my age, in about the year 2050, there are some predictions that up to 1 billion people will be forcibly displaced by climate change and war unless we change course. I don't think for 1 second that mindfulness training is going to solve all of the world's problems. But I do find hope in the stories of some of the people that I've told you about today, who are now investigating if teaching mindfulness to teenagers in their school years can prevent them from developing depression later in life, and whose programs for traumatised refugees have the potential to transform tens of thousands of lives. I don't think for 1 second that mindfulness is a quick fix. And as we face all of this together, there is one thing that I can tell you for sure. As every good flight attendant will tell you, if the plane is going down, it is best to put on your own oxygen mask first. I know that my own life would have been monumentally different if I had known from a much younger age that my mental well-being is just as important as eating a healthy diet and getting enough sleep and exercising regularly. Mindfulness is not a quick fix, but it is a very simple skill that teaches us to understand how our minds work. And that makes all the difference.